Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining NCDEQ for our second Volkswagen Settlement Level 2 Rebate Program webinar. Unfortunately, the original recording of Wednesday's webinar was not saved, so this is a re-recording of the presentation, the information segment with Caitlin Rose of Triangle Clean Cities Coalition, and the question and answers at the webinar's conclusion. The webinar will now proceed as if it was captured live, again on January 13th. I'm Stephen Rice, an environmental specialist for the Division of Air Quality and the Level 2 Program Manager, and I'm joined by additional DAQ staff who manage other aspects of the Volkswagen settlement. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. All attendees will be muted during the webinar. Questions can be submitted in the Q&A box and will be addressed during the question and answer time if not covered in the presentation. The raised hand feature will be disabled until the question and answer time and will only be considered for those who called into the webinar by phone. For those calling in, pressing *3 will raise your hand and pressing *3 again will lower your hand. All other attendees must use the Q&A box to submit their questions. Also, just like the first webinar, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the DAQ Volkswagen website at a later date. Finally, we have an hour and a half to discuss the program, application process, and updates that have been made since our first webinar in detail. But if we complete everything, answer all questions with time to spare, we have the option to adjourn early. If we are not able to answer all questions by the end of the hour and a half, we will let you know how to get your questions to us. When today's presentation becomes available on the DAQ Level 2 website, be aware that links found in the slides will only be active when used in presentation mode. So today's webinar will cover the main topics of December's webinar, and we'll go into further detail regarding topics and updates that have come up since. Answers to questions we've received have been incorporated into the presentation, and a list of questions and answers from the first webinar is available on the DAQ Volkswagen website. We will not have the demonstrations of the NCID registration process or sample application today, but those can be reviewed in the first webinar recording. However, toward the end of today's presentation, you'll hear from Caitlin Rose of TJCOG, who will talk about what kind of resources can be made available to you during the application process. I'd like to remind attendees that this is not a public forum for comments on the implementation of the Volkswagen settlement. The RFP for the Level 2 rebate program was released on November 17th, 2020, but there have been some updates made for clarification purposes. The Level 2 program overview found in the RFP states that NCDEQ is allocating the full 15% allowed in the Volkswagen State Trust Agreement for zero-emission vehicle, or ZEV, infrastructure projects outlined in the NC Mitigation Plan. NCDEQ will give 75% of the Phase 1 ZEV infrastructure allocation to DC fast charging infrastructure projects and 25% to Level 2 charging infrastructure projects. The primary goal is to increase the use of ZEVs in place of gas-powered cars to mitigate nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and greenhouse gas emissions in the state. To achieve that goal, the program will emphasize adding new ZEV charging infrastructure in underserved areas, extend the existing light-duty ZEV infrastructure across the state, encourage intrastate and interstate ZEV vehicle usage at North Carolina's diverse geographic, historic, and tourist attractions, and also highlight the environmental benefits of ZEVs. Applications for this program will be accepted as of 12 a.m. on January 25th. Eligible applications will be accepted and approved on a first-come, first-served basis until all funds are exhausted. Just like the diesel and DC fast programs in Phase 1, the Phase 1 Level 2 rebate program is a reimbursement program. Applicants must be able to purchase and install the equipment using their own funds. Applicants and locations are both limited to $25,000 in approved rebate vouchers at any time, and applications received after an applicant or location has reached that $25,000 limit will be rejected. All rebate vouchers expire 180 days after an agreement is signed by an awardee and DEQ, and extensions for reimbursement will not be granted. So, who is eligible to receive a rebate voucher? In short, eligible applicants include government organizations, non-government organizations, workplaces, and multi-unit family dwellings. DAQ has received a lot of questions regarding the main applicant categories, so let's look at them now in more detail. The term government means a state, local, or federal government agency owning fleets purchased with government funds. This would include school district, municipality, city, county, special district, transit district, joint powers authority, or port authority. A tribal government or a native village is also included, and the full list of government entities can be found in the RFP. Non-government organizations. So according to the RFP, these would be considered businesses, and the term business means corporations, partnerships, sole proprietorships, limited liability companies, business trusts or other legal business entities incorporated in or registered with the North Carolina Department of the Secretary of State. Workplaces. Workplaces must have at least 5 or more year-round and full-time employees, and DAQ will require a Level 2 workplace certification document to confirm this and other information to go with a workplace application. Workplaces located in a single-family residence are not eligible for funding, and any business being operated from a home, apartment, or other dwelling where people live on the premises is not considered eligible. The Level 2 workplace certification document will be made available on our webpage prior to January 25th. Multi-unit dwellings. The term multi-unit dwellings, also known as a MUD, means housing where multiple separate housing units for residential inhabitants are contained within one building or within several buildings in one complex. This includes, but is not limited to, apartment buildings and condominiums, and excludes individually owned townhomes, row houses, or mobile homes. For a MUD to be rebate eligible, it must have 10 or more dwelling units. And just a reminder that the full list of eligible applicants and descriptions is found in the RFP, along with the cost share requirements and a table which reflects rebate amounts. Let's look at that table now. This table helps visualize the maximum rebate available for a variety of eligible applicants and project types. During the first webinar, we talked about how one difference between the DC FAST program and the Level 2 program is that the Level 2 does not require a project to be accessible to the general public. And with this table, we can see how that designation factors into the maximum rebate amounts. Please note that the maximum rebate amount possible for your project will be either the maximum rebate per charging port or maximum rebate or maximum percentage of total project costs, whichever is less. To help clarify the difference between a public project and a private project, as seen in the table, public access requires a minimum of 12 hours a day of availability to the general public without restriction of any type, and the site must be convenient for users of the charging station. For workplaces and multi-unit dwellings where access may be restricted, charging stations may not be dedicated to specific individuals. As mentioned in the first webinar, all Level 2 applications must be submitted via the DAQ Grants Management System, also known as the GMS. If you are currently not a GMS user, you will need to complete a DAQ GMS Access Authorization Form and a State of North Carolina Substitute W-9 form to gain access. Please note that a federal W-9 form will not be accepted. You can download these forms from DAQ's Volkswagen website, and please try to submit them prior to 5 p.m. on January 20th. You're going to hear this a few times today, but if everyone waits to submit their forms until the last minute, the Volkswagen team and the SAP team will require additional time to process the backlog. Also, contact DAQ instead of VBS support if you have any questions regarding your forms or access to the GMS. Again, please make every effort to submit your forms prior to January 20th of this year. To request access to the DAQ grants management system, you will need an NCID to complete the access request form. In this slide, we have provided links for NCID registration, as well as the how to create an NCID guide. And in our first webinar, Dave Willis provided a real-time tutorial on how to obtain an NCID. That tutorial can be reviewed in the webinar recording found on the DAQ Volkswagen website. So some important NCID information. If you already have an individual or government NCID, there is no need to create a new NCID. Or if you are a current user of the NCDOT grant system with Powell Bill, the Governor Highway Safety Program, Public Transportation Division, or other forms, put that username on the authorization form. But please also specify that this is an NCDOT grants username. Also, once you have completed an NCID request, you will receive a new NCID user registration email from ncid.notifications@nc.gov. You must click the link in the email and follow the instructions to complete the registration of your NCID before submitting the GMS Access Authorization form. On the DAQ Access Authorization form, you can see that an organization may add up to 3 authorized users to the grants management system. Please note that a separate form is required for each organizational user, and the organization address will need to match on each submitted form. Once the form is completed, it should be attached to an email and sent to svc.ncvwapplication@ncdner.gov. So third-party access authorization forms. In cases where an applicant has a third party submitting applications on their behalf, the following procedures must be followed. The applicant must provide in writing that they are authorizing the third party to submit applications and other information on their behalf. And also, the third party will need to obtain their own NCID and submit an access authorization form with the applicant's organization address information and the third party's phone number and email address. The third party's title should be listed as contractor on the form. So here we can see a third party example where an organization named Main Street Coffee is seeking the assistance of John Doe for their Level 2 project. This would be John Doe's authorization form following the acquisition of his NCID. You can see that he used his NCID and name in the form, but then used Main Street Coffee's information for organization name, address, and telephone. He then designated himself as a contractor, provided his email address, and would eventually go on to certify the form before submission. An email from Main Street Coffee authorizing John Doe could be as simple as, Main Street Coffee is applying for Level 2 rebate program funding. John Doe from Southern Energy will be the point of contact for us and will also manage the project. So here we can see part of the State of North Carolina Substitute W-9 form. This form allows DAQ to set up an organization with new GMS users in the North Carolina accounting system in order to receive reimbursement payments. As stated previously, all new GMS users, we encourage you to submit these 2 required forms by 5 p.m. on January 20th. And please double check to make sure all required fields are filled in and that both forms are signed. We also encourage you to fill in the documents electronically versus by hand. So here are some tips and necessary things to know which have come up repeatedly during the early stages of receiving GMS forms. Applicants should send all forms to svc.ncvwapplication@ncdner.gov. Once your GMS registration is complete, you will receive a Welcome to the DAQ Enterprise Business System email from the Service Account-SAP account. Make sure your email spam filter is not blocking the following email address, sapacct@ncdot.gov. Applicants that have questions about the status of their GMS access request should only be contacting the Level 2 Program Manager. Again, please do not contact EBS support about this concern. Waiting until January 20th to submit forms may create a backlog, which could delay processing your request by the January 25th application release date. Please submit your forms as soon as possible. Those who have been granted access to the grants management system will not see the Level 2 application until January 25th. A sample application is available at the following address on our DAQ Volkswagen website. And finally, step-by-step tutorials are available within the grants management system. These tutorials are there to help you navigate and better understand the grants management system experience. But again, once you have access to the GMS, you should have access to these tutorials. So when it comes to receiving these grants management system access forms, we've encountered a number of common problems. For the access authorization form, most revolve around the NCID, like how people are not including their NCID on the form or not completing the process to obtain an NCID prior to submitting the form. We've also received forms that lack required signatures, and for the W-9 form, we've had alternate versions of a W-9 form submitted, again, which are not acceptable. Forms with required fields being left unfilled, and again, submitted forms without a signature. Please make sure you avoid these common problems. Submit both forms completely and preferably at the same time, and contact DAQ instead of EBS support if you have any questions. So at this point, you may be feeling overwhelmed with seeing all the forms and the information needed just to apply. Like I said during the first webinar, you are certainly not the only one out there that's feeling this way. To help make sure that all application requirements are being met, we have created an application checklist which covers general requirements, plus requirements specifically for the Level 2 program. The link to this checklist is found in this slide and also on the DAQ Volkswagen website. All documentation must be included when submitting an application for that application to be reviewed. A complete application includes the following attachments when applicable. Like I mentioned earlier, with the workplace application, there may be a need for additional required forms per project type, and if so, they will be made available on our webpage prior to January 25th. Attachments must be uploaded to the GMS along with your application. Since our first webinar, DAQ has updated the rebate calculator to allow applicants to enter multiple project locations consisting of the same project type. For example, if you are planning to install 5 chargers in 5 different locations, and the project type for all 5 chargers is non-government with public access, all 5 locations can be included on a single spreadsheet. If one of those 5 chargers was for a workplace with no public access, a separate application and a separate spreadsheet would be required for that charger. Please keep in mind that all of the sites in a single awarded application would need to be completed in the same 180-day time frame. So now to the Level 2 projects. The Volkswagen State Mitigation Trust Agreement states in Appendix D2, Paragraph 9, that trust funds may be used on costs necessary for and directly connected to the acquisition, installation, operation, and maintenance of new light-duty, zero-emission vehicle supply equipment. The following items qualify for reimbursement: Level 2 charging station infrastructure, the conduit, cable wiring, and electrical service box disconnect additions, concrete or asphalt replacement, paint striping and stenciling of the station parking spaces, signage to advertise your charging station, bollards which are put in place to protect your charging station, permit costs, the labor for installation, and this includes electrical and trenching, shipping of the charging station equipment, networking charges, and this is a maximum of 5 years if paid in advance prior to the voucher redemption, and EVSC maintenance contracts, again for a maximum of 5 years if paid in advance prior to voucher redemption. This list and a list of ineligible expenditures are both found in the Level 2 RFP. Also, we understand that some companies offer hybrid or subscription payment programs for their chargers, and while these are acceptable, an applicant will still need to calculate and pay for 5 years of required operational costs upfront. Okay, so let's talk about charging station payment options. This section was recently added to the RFP for clarification and is more or less the same requirements as the DC Fast program. So Level 2 charging station awardees have the option either to require payment or not require payment from users. Should payment be required to access and use the charging stations, it must be payment card industry compliant to allow use of a credit or debit card. Stations may also offer additional user payment methods, including subscription methods, smart cards, or smartphone applications. The DAQ Volkswagen team has received a lot of questions about site visits and the 180-day rebate voucher period since our first webinar. We've made this informational section a little more robust and want to address some of those questions here. DAQ staff will perform site visits at all stations to verify installation and operation of the charging station prior to approval of any voucher claim. DAQ staff must be granted access to the charging site, and please know that accepted COVID-19 safety protocols will be followed by DAQ staff. The final DAQ verification site visits are not required during the 180-day rebate voucher period, but are required for claim reimbursement approval. Rebates will be dispersed as reimbursements after the work is completed, verified, and approved. Certification that the station infrastructure is fully operational is required within the 180-day rebate voucher period. And partial reimbursements will not be approved. The entire project must be completed for reimbursement. So in closing, Level 2 rebate applications can be submitted via the DAQ Grants Management System starting on January 25th, 2021 at 12 a.m. Eastern Time. GMS access authorization forms are required or are recommended to be submitted prior to January 20th, 2021 to prevent a backlog of forms processing. Please make sure every effort to submit your forms prior to this date is being made. Again, please email all GMS access authorization forms to svc.ncvwapplication@ncdnr.gov, and DAQ will not accept paper, faxed, or scanned applications. All applications must be entered and submitted via the DAQ Grants Management System. Again, just a reminder, this is a reimbursement program. All funding will be in the form of reimbursements. Applicants must be able to purchase and install the equipment using their own funds. Again, this is a reimbursement program. Applicants are limited to $25,000 in approved rebate vouchers at any time. And rebate vouchers expire 180 days from the date the agreement is signed by the awardee and by DEQ. No extensions to this will be granted. So here is the current Level 2 rebate program timeline. Please note that revisions to the November 17th, 2020 RFP were posted to the DAQ website on January 7th, and the revision notes and revised RFP are both on that webpage for your access. Starting January 25th, applications will be evaluated on a weekly basis. A running total of remaining funds for both urban, suburban, and rural projects will be displayed on the Volkswagen website as rebate totals are subtracted from the total funding. And rebate recipients will be announced as they are awarded throughout the year. And once again, for good measure, new GMS users, please remember that we recommend the required forms be submitted to DAQ by 5 p.m. on January 20th to allow for processing time. If you have any questions following today's webinar, you can visit the frequently asked questions section of the Volkswagen website at deq.nc.gov/VW settlement. If you don't find your answers there, you can always email your questions to deq.nc_VWgrants@ncdiener.gov. There are also several local public and private resources you can utilize during this process, such as Centralina Clean Cities Coalition, Forsyth County Office of Environmental Assistance and Protection, the Land of Sky Regional Council, Mecklenburg County Air Quality Agency, NCSU Clean Energy Technology Center, the Piedmont Triad Regional Council, Plug-in NC, Sustainable Sandhills, the Triangle J Council of Governments, also known as TJ-COG, and the Western NC Regional Air Quality Agency. Their contact information is all available on the DEQ Volkswagen website. At this time, I would like to turn over the presentation to Caitlin Rose. Caitlin is the coordinator of the Triangle Clean Cities Coalition, which is housed at Triangle J Council of Governments. She is going to discuss their involvement with this process and working with clean cities. Take it away, Caitlin.
Thank you, Stephen. Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin Rose, and I'm the coordinator of the Triangle Clean Cities Coalition, which is a program housed at Triangle J Council of Governments in Durham. I'll be speaking to you all today about working with your local Clean Cities Coalition during the Level 2 rebate application process and what we can offer you as a resource to help you prepare a competitive application. Next slide. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar, Clean Cities is a program housed at the U.S. Department of Energy within the Vehicle Technologies Office, working to advance alternative fuels and sustainable transportation solutions. We're a national network of nearly 100 coalitions serving a territory encompassing over 80% of the U.S. population, and we work with stakeholders regionally to build partnerships, provide technical assistance, and empower decision makers with the information they need to successfully implement new transportation strategies. We work with stakeholders of all kinds, spanning both the public and the private sectors. So as you can see on this map, some coalitions cover entire states, but in North Carolina, there are 3 specific coalitions that serve our state, all of which are housed at councils of governments, which gives us a unique regional view of coalition programming. So in the Triangle area, you have the Triangle Clean Cities Coalition, of which I am the coordinator. Centralina Clean Fuels Coalition is in the Greater Charlotte region, and the Land of Sky Clean Vehicles Coalition is in the Asheville region. So the 3 coalitions often work together to extend our reach outside of our local coalition territories, as well as with other statewide partners such as Plug-in NC and the North Carolina Clean Tech Center, just to name a few. Next slide. We advance alternative fuels in a number of different ways, following a couple strategies handed down to us from the National Clean Cities Program housed at DOE, including, and these include things like idle reduction and deployment of new advanced technologies and working with vehicles of all sizes from light to heavy duty. But our real bread and butter lies in our knowledge of alternative fuels and their associated infrastructure. So in that sense, the Volkswagen settlement and its mission fits right in with our own mission as Clean Cities Coalitions, and we're excited to be available as a resource for you. Next slide. And we can help you and provide assistance in a number of different ways. First among which the North Carolina coalitions and Plug-in NC have prepared a checklist for applicants to walk you through the big questions you should be considering during this process, including things about vendor evaluation, site host needs, and equipment for electrical and infrastructure installation. So while this document is not intended to be an exhaustive list, it's a great starting point for applicants of all types to use while preparing your application. And in the event that your organization has more questions or would like additional support, coalition staff are available for more detailed assistance. So please feel free to reach out to us. We are here and ready to help you. And I'll share our contact information in just a minute. But this checklist document is available on Plug-in NC's website, and a link will be shared with attendees after the webinar. We can also provide more targeted technical assistance to interested applicants with the preparation of your application materials. So again, reaching out to local coalition staff is a good next step if that's something that's interesting to you. Our coalitions have a good track record of working with applicants, on previous Volkswagen settlement applications, and have seen a number of projects awarded funding in the past year. So we are excited to keep that up with this round of funding. We have an extensive knowledge of local partners as well. So if you need assistance with evaluating technology options, working with vendors and the like, please feel free to reach out to us. Next slide. And that's everything I have for you all today. As promised, here is our contact information. Again, as I mentioned, there are 3 coalitions operating in North Carolina. So depending on where you live, there's 3 options of people to reach out to. Myself in the Triangle area, my colleague Karina Soriano in the Charlotte region, and my colleague Sarah Nichols in the Asheville region. And if you live in an area that's not covered by one of our coalition territories, I'd recommend reaching out to Plug-in NC. Again, is a statewide advocacy group related to EV education. Jacob Bolin is your contact over there, and they're a fantastic resource. So thank you so much for having me today, and I'll turn things back over to you, Stephen.
All right. Thank you, Caitlin, for that information and for being a great resource for our interested applicants. For DEQ resources, here are the technical contacts for the Level 2 program. Again, I'm Stephen Rice, and I'm the Level 2 Infrastructure Program Manager. We have Dave Willis, who is the DC Fast Infrastructure Program Manager. We have Brian Phillips, who is the manager of the Volkswagen Mitigation Plan as a whole. And we also have Robin Barrows, who is in charge of Volkswagen Outreach. I want to remind everyone that the Level 2 charging is looking like a very popular Phase 1 program. If your Level 2 project is not awarded a rebate voucher in Phase 1, you will still have the opportunity to reapply in Phase 2. The Phase 2 planning and stakeholder process will begin once Phase 1 contracts for the diesel bus and vehicle and the DC Fast programs are in place. When the Phase 2 stakeholder process starts, notifications will be posted to our webpage and sent to subscribers of the NCVW email distribution list. To sign up for the NCVW email distribution list, please send an email to daq.nc_VWgrants@ncdnr.gov with subscribe in the subject line. So before we go into our Q&A time, I would like to point out some things regarding the first webinar and today's webinar. A webinar recording or a recording of the December 11th, 2020 webinar is available on the Level 2 program webpage. A recording of today's webinar will also be made available soon. Questions and answers from both webinars will be available on the Level 2 program webpage. A completed sample application and spreadsheet is available to download on the Level 2 program webpage. Again, you will not have access to the Level 2 application until January 25th, but you do have the sample application and spreadsheet to review. And finally, requests for this webinar attendee list must be sent to daq.nc_VWgrants@ncdnr.gov. So that concludes the informational part of our webinar, and now we will address questions collected in the Q&A box. A big thanks to Robin, Melanie, and Jill for going through all of these questions. Our host will now enable the raised hand feature for those who called into the webinar by phone. Pressing *3 will raise your hand, and pressing *3 again will lower your hand. All other attendees must use the Q&A box to submit questions. I would like to remind attendees that this is not a public forum for comments on the implementation of the VW settlement, and questions will need to pertain to the Level 2 program. Jill, we are ready whenever you are.
Okay, Stephen, our first question is from Lance. His question is, upon submission of the application, what is the anticipated response turnaround?
Okay, thank you, Jill, and thank you, Lance. The anticipated response and the way we're going to handle these reviews are that applications will be evaluated on a weekly basis. We do want to watch these applications come in real time and give them all attention, but at a minimum, they will be evaluated on a weekly basis.
Our next question is from Megan. She says, in regard to the substitute W-9 form, is a form completed in 2018 acceptable, or does it need to be signed this year?
Thank you for that question. We need a current and completed NC W-9 substitute form from within the last 6 months. That's where we're drawing the line. That is the requirement, within the last 6 months.
Our next question is from Phil. To confirm, a single application can include multiple charging stations as long as they are of the same accessibility.
Well, thank you for that question, Phil. Yes, the rebate calculator has been adjusted to reflect this change and to allow multiple charging station locations for one single application. Just a reminder that all charging stations on the calculator spreadsheet must be the same project type and must have the same form of accessibility.
Our next question is from Leighton. How do you recommend we locate qualified contractors who can complete the project?
DEQ and DAQ cannot recommend contractors. Please see the slides from this presentation and then the information on our webpage of our additional resources, our public resources. They would be helpful to you as you try to locate these contractors.
Kurt will ask the question, for people submitting for a campus, does specific location mean the campus area as a whole or a specific site within the campus? Which address do we use on the application?
Thanks, Kurt, for that question. Yes, campus as a whole is considered as a location, but the application can have separate sites. Details for each location must be included on the rebate funding calculator form. And please use the address on the W-9 form on the application for these sites.
David says, is there an example of an application? If more than one person is working on the application, do both need an NCID?
Yes, a sample application and rebate calculation form is on the website. And to the second part of that question, yes, both will need an NCID, their own individual NCID.
Tony would like to know where will the slides be available for download?
Tony, thank you for that question. The slides and the recording of this webinar will be made available on the DAQ Volkswagen webpage, along with all of our other level 2 information.
Rick wants to know, are solar and battery backup eligibility features costs, can they be included?
If a solar and battery backup, if those are components of the ESVE, then yes. Please remember there is a maximum rebate per port based on the project type and accessibility.
Tony asks, if the project needs to be modified after grant approval, like location of chargers in our parking area, will that be a problem?
If the project needs to be modified, please contact the program manager, that being myself, to request approval for any modifications due to the changes in the location of your charging equipment. Location changes must be within a reasonable distance from the original location, and that's something that the Volkswagen team will review. But again, any question regarding modification of any kind to your application or to the approval, please contact me.
Heather asks, could you review the definition of government entity again? Does the DAQ recognize community colleges as government entities?
Thank you for that question, Heather. I will say the definition is included in the slide earlier in this presentation, which again, in the entire presentation will be there for review. But the definition for this is also in the RFP on page 3 under eligible applicants.
Jonathan would like to know, does the latitude, longitude need to be exact for the unit or for the address where it's located?
Thank you for that question, Jonathan. Yeah, just a reminder that lat longs do need to be included in the site information. If site is close to the address of the property, please use those coordinates. If the sites are spread out, like on a university in multiple locations, in that case, please use the specific GPS coordinates of each of those locations.
Tony wants to know, does the vendor providing the quote have to perform the work?
No, the vendor that provides the quote does not necessarily need to perform the work. You may change your vendor if that suits you in the project. I will say though that awardees are still limited to the rebate voucher amount for their reimbursement. So while the vendor may change, note that the prices may change, and if that happens, you will still not be awarded over what the rebate voucher is set to.
Lance asks, can you share a list of today's participants like you did in the first WebEx?
Thank you, Lance, for that question. Yes, we would be happy to share the participants of today's webinar. If you want the list of participants, please send a request to daq.nc_vwgrants@ncdnr.gov.
Aaron asks, can you confirm whether we should submit only one application with multiple projects if our stations will be in 3 different locations in the Wilmington area, but with different zip codes?
Thank you for that question, Aaron. I don't want to say what you should do per se, but I will say that all the charging stations must be of the same project type and have the same accessibility to all be included on the same application. It is your choice whether you want to include all of those projects in one application or to parse them out into multiple applications. But again, if you are to group multiple chargers with the same project type and accessibility, each of those need to be included and detailed on the rebate calculator form.
Catherine asks, will you let us know when the funds are exhausted?
Hi, Catherine. Yes, the DAQ Volkswagen website will be updated weekly with available funds after the rebate vouchers are awarded. We will have a running total of how much money is available refreshed on a weekly basis.
Jake wants to know, are you able to upgrade existing charging units with units that qualify for the rebate? This is a public workspace area.
Thank you, Jake, for that question. Yes, replacements are eligible, but this is specifically if the unit that is being replaced is not repairable.
Jonathan asks, are the costs submitted to be quotes, or do they need to be exact? For example, installation by an electrician that could encounter unforeseen problems.
Yes, Jonathan, there always is room for unforeseen problems. Again, under the living situations, the pandemic, it seems like everything is subject to change. But for your answer specifically, the rebate voucher awarded amounts will be based on the project submitted in the application. However, reimbursements will be based on the actual paid invoices that DAQ receives. The costs or any cost that exceeds the awarded rebate amount voucher will not be part of the reimbursement.
David would like to know, do you anticipate the funds to be exhausted quickly based on interest?
While we don't know this for sure, I can say that there is a very, very high interest in this level 2 program. We would recommend, if you are interested in applying, that you apply earlier rather than later. And also note that submitting an incomplete application will not hold a rebate voucher spot. Again, if these applications are reviewed on a weekly basis and they're deemed to be incomplete, applications will be rejected. So you can't have a partially completed application submitted, right at the crack of dawn on the 25th to hold that early spot. It has to be considered a complete application.
Great. Phil would like to know, applications can be submitted at 1 minute after midnight on January 25th?
Technically, yes. 1 minute after midnight on the 25th. As far as we've instructed, the level 2 application will be available at that point. Keep in mind that if the forms are incomplete, they will be returned, and submitting an incomplete application, again, will not hold a rebate voucher spot.
Kurt wants to know, what is deemed publicly accessible?
Thank you, Kurt, for that question. Specifically, again, we covered public accessibility earlier in the presentation, so there is a slide that references that information. This is also in the RFP, specifically on page 5. Public access requires a minimum of 12 hours a day of availability, and proof of this will need to be included with your application. But again, this is 12 hours of availability to the general public without restriction. And to be publicly accessible, the site must be convenient for users of that charging station.
One final question. Could you please clarify the networking and ESVE maintenance contracts requirements? Is 5 years the maximum required?
5 years is the requirement. All of these projects require 5-year contracts, and the funding or the rebate amount will only cover through that 5. So if for any reason the organization and the people doing the project want to extend that maintenance contract or the service contract, the networking contract, those are not costs. The 5 years that is required are eligible in the reimbursement. Brian, do you have any additional information on that one? No. Okay.
Stephen, that was the last question that we had.
Okay, wonderful. Again, I really appreciate everyone's attendance today, and I hope that you found this second webinar worthwhile. I also want to thank everyone on the Volkswagen team and as well, Caitlin Rose for their help on the presentation and getting this webinar off the ground successfully. Just a reminder that all the contact information and application-related email accounts found in this presentation are also found on the DAQ Volkswagen website. Again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to working with you very, very soon. Have a good rest of your day.
Start recording, Steve.